Picture a sprawling driveway lined with century-old oak trees, their branches forming a grand, shadowy canopy. At the end of this quiet approach stands the majestic Beauclair mansion, its marble columns gleaming under the moonlight. In the hush of midnight, a sleek black limousine pulls up to the front steps, delivering the triumphant millionaire Donovan Pierce. He's not alone. Clinging to his arm is Serena Quinn, a dazzling model with secrets of her own. Donovan steps out, brimming with confidence, prepared to flaunt his latest conquest. Little does he know, behind those massive double doors, his pregnant wife already waits, with a pair of earth-shattering surprises. Donovan Pierce was born in Santa Barbara, California, in the early 1980s. He was the youngest son of a middle-class family whose only luxury was a subscription to National Geographic. His parents, Randall and Josephine Pierce, both taught at the local community college. Though they were hardly wealthy, they instilled in Donovan the idea that knowledge could open doors that money alone could never pry open. Donovan, a sharp-eyed, wiry kid with a stubborn streak, found solace in reading about faraway lands. He dreamed of traveling to Africa, exploring the Amazon, and someday having enough money to live in a grand estate of his own. In high school, Donovan's natural charm made him popular among peers. Though not an exceptional athlete, he excelled in debate and showed a fierce determination to win any argument. Teachers praised him for his intelligence and tenacity, but behind the confident demeanor lay an unsatisfied hunger. He wanted more, always more. This insatiable thirst for success would become his defining trait, one that propelled him through life at breakneck speed. By the time he graduated, Donovan had his sights set on Stanford University. Through scholarships and financial aid, he secured enrollment in the prestigious institution. There, he fell in love with economics and business. By senior year, he was running an investment club with 40 members. They pooled their modest funds and tested the volatile waters of the stock market. Donovan didn't just want to break even, he wanted to crush the market. Armed with cunning strategies and long nights studying charts, he managed to bring their returns to remarkable heights. Word spread about his uncanny ability to see market trends before they became mainstream. Upon graduation, Donovan accepted a position at a well-known financial firm in New York. Only 22, he was already sitting in conference rooms with high-profile clients, including the likes of Warren Buffett's associates and other billionaires scouting fresh talent. Donovan took every opportunity he could to glean wisdom from these industry titans. His nights were spent with spreadsheets, analyzing stock movements, and his days were consumed by endless networking. Over the next decade, Donovan rose to prominence. He founded his own investment firm, Pierce Capital Management, and took his net worth from a humble few $1,000s to tens of millions, then hundreds of millions. Eventually, his name appeared on the covers of financial magazines. He became a recognized figure, invited to speak at conferences worldwide. Yet Donovan's ambition was boundless. He set his eyes on surpassing every record in the book and building a personal life that reflected his success. It was during this lofty ascent that he met Elizabeth Radcliffe, a descendant of old money. Elizabeth was a well-educated philanthropist, known for championing causes related to women's health. She was radiant in a quiet way, elegant, thoughtful, and with a moral compass that ran deeper than Donovan's relentless drive. Her mother, Caroline Radcliffe, was once part of a philanthropic circle involving the late Princess Diana, donating to charitable organizations across Europe. The Radcliffe heritage included a storied estate in the Hamptons and connections to aristocrats in England. Donovan was attracted to Elizabeth's poise and the air of dignity she carried wherever she went. Their relationship started gently long walks by the shoreline in East Hampton, quiet dinners at exclusive clubs, intellectual discussions about the future of finance and philanthropy. Before long, Donovan realized that Elizabeth wasn't just another accessory to be paraded around. She was a pillar of wisdom and stability, someone who kept him tethered to his humanity when greed tugged him off-center. The world watched in fascination when Donovan and Elizabeth wed in a grand ceremony at the Radcliffe family's estate. Media outlets splashed their pictures across the front pages, calling it the merger of new money and old world grace. In an unexpected twist of sincerity, Donovan's vows to Elizabeth were heartfelt. He promised to love, protect, and treasure her, never letting wealth overshadow his devotion to her and any future family they might have. But the shadows of desire and ambition sometimes morph into darker forms. Even as Donovan soared to greater financial heights, he found himself haunted by a restless energy. He wanted excitement, passion, anything to satiate an appetite for novelty that neither Elizabeth's serene presence nor his legitimate business triumphs could fully feed. And so the seeds of betrayal were sown. Elizabeth's life had revolved around philanthropic ventures long before she met Donovan. But her marriage brought new challenges. She struggled to find a balance between supporting Donovan's insatiable ambitions and preserving her own identity. With each passing year, Donovan's name grew in the financial sector, which meant more publicity, more parties, more demands. Elizabeth attended numerous galas as the gracious hostess. She wore dazzling gowns, smiled for photos, and patiently listened to endless conversations about stocks and corporate expansions. In private, Elizabeth was not as meek as the media painted her to be. She had her convictions. She often confronted Donovan about certain investments that seemed questionable, environmentally damaging ventures, profits extracted from borderline unethical deals. Donovan would smile and reassure her that everything was within legal bounds. "This is how we fund your charities," he teased. "We do well, and then we do good." Most of the time, Elizabeth would sigh, letting the conversation fade. She recognized that Donovan's approach to business was a far cry from her father's genteel style. Still, she believed in her husband's underlying decency. Years into the marriage, Elizabeth yearned for a child. At first, Donovan brushed off the topic. "Let's solidify the business," he would say. "Let me cross a few major milestones, and then we'll talk about starting a family." Deep down, Elizabeth suspected Donovan was afraid to be pinned down by the responsibilities of fatherhood. He thrived on risk spontaneity and the freedom to jet off to Europe or Asia at a moment's notice if a deal demanded it. However, the unstoppable march of time and a near-death experience, Elizabeth's father had a sudden stroke, galvanized them. Realizing how fragile life could be, Donovan agreed they should try for a child. In the following months, Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant, and the new reality thrilled her. She glowed with expectancy, her philanthropic work pivoting to focus on maternal health and child welfare. Donovan seemed happy about the news at first, but his reaction lacked the effusive zeal Elizabeth had hoped for. She told herself it was simply Donovan's nature to remain collected, even about momentous life changes. During the pregnancy, Elizabeth took refuge in the quiet comforts of Beauclair Mansion, an estate the couple had purchased in the countryside of upstate New York. Surrounded by lush forests and rolling hills, it provided the perfect retreat from the swirling chaos of Manhattan life. There, away from public scrutiny, Elizabeth could focus on preparing for motherhood. Donovan often visited on weekends, always claiming he was too busy with urgent business deals during the week. As months rolled on, Elizabeth began to suspect that Donovan's late nights and business trips might not all be about closing deals. Even so, Elizabeth tried to cast aside her doubts. She had twins on the way, 2 lives growing within her 2 blessings that she believed would knit her and Donovan closer together. She wrote in her diary each day, documenting every emotional shift, every flutter in her belly, and every dream she had of a future filled with children's laughter, echoing through the mansion's halls. In these private moments, Elizabeth recounted her grandmother's stories of how love in a marriage was tested in unthinkable ways, but devotion and faith often carried couples through the darkest storms. She had no idea that her test would come so soon, or in such a heart-wrenching manner. Serena Quinn was the kind of woman people instinctively watched as soon as she walked into a room. With almond-shaped hazel eyes and wavy auburn hair cascading to her waist, she emanated a fiery energy that demanded attention. She had been raised in a modest household in San Diego, her father a retired Marine, her mother a struggling painter. Despite their limited means, Serena's parents poured their hearts into supporting her talents, whether it was ballet painting or modeling. By 18, Serena signed with an upscale modeling agency and discovered a taste for the finer things in life. The swirling lights of fashion, shows designer gowns, and the glittering stares of cameras dazzled her. She lived for backstage parties and exclusive VIP events where she rubbed shoulders with celebrities and moguls. Over time, she learned how to charm men of power. That charm wasn't always innocent. For Serena, it became a method of survival and advancement in a cutthroat world. If she played her cards right, she could secure financial stability that might otherwise elude her. Her path crossed with Donovan Pierce on a private yacht off the coast of Monaco. Donovan was there for a high-profile tech conference, and Serena had been hired to model for a European luxury brand. The second Donovan saw her laughing on the deck, wearing an opulent emerald gown that clung to her figure, he felt an old, forbidden spark ignite. He introduced himself with characteristic smoothness, Donovan Pierce, of Pierce Capital Management. Might I ask whose stunning presence I'm fortunate enough to share this deck with? Serena knew the name anyone in high society did. She smiled coyly. Serena Quinn. A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Pierce. Over champagne flutes, they exchanged banter about the future of cryptocurrencies and the enthralling but superficial nature of fashion. She was witty. He was enthralled. One conversation led to another, and soon the shimmering lights of Monaco's coastline faded into the hush of the night. Donovan found himself lost in Serena's raw magnetism, a stark contrast to Elizabeth's graceful composure. Despite knowing full well that he was married, his ring was conspicuous, and the media had documented his marriage extensively. Serena fueled Donovan's flirtation. To her, men like Donovan offered not just adventure, but entry into circles with deeper pockets. The moral transgression didn't worry her. She had grown accustomed to seeing powerful men cheat on their wives, and in her line of work, infidelity was treated as a negotiable taboo. Before the yacht docked, Donovan and Serena shared a clandestine kiss on the upper deck, hidden from prying eyes by the summer darkness. Donovan told himself it was just a fleeting moment of indiscretion. He was a man on top of the world. Why shouldn't he savor every flavor of pleasure life offered? But fleeting infatuations can quickly grow into an all-consuming secret. When Donovan returned to New York, he found excuses to see Serena again, ostensibly for business, though they both knew it was anything but. She became his shadow at exclusive clubs, late-night penthouse soirees and business trips where he needed a companion to keep him entertained. He showered her with designer handbags, diamond jewelry, and even helped her land more lucrative modeling gigs. Serena, for her part, clung to Donovan's generosity, offering him the rush of a hidden romance he couldn't get from his stable married life. Weeks turned into months, and their affair deepened. Serena reveled in the luxurious life Donovan provided: 5-star hotels, exotic vacations, lavish gifts. Meanwhile, Donovan craved her presence like a drug, ignoring any semblance of guilt. He told himself Elizabeth was preoccupied with her charities. Her pregnancy, there was no harm in letting off some steam. In a moment of recklessness, Donovan invited Serena to spend a weekend at Beauclair Mansion. It was an impulsive plan, born from a chaotic swirl of desire and pride. After all, Elizabeth was supposed to be spending those days in Manhattan for a friend's baby shower, or so Donovan believed. Little did he realize Elizabeth had cut her city trip short, too exhausted to endure the social rigmarole, and determined to relax in her own home. Destiny was about to orchestrate a collision of secrets, lies, and revelations that would upend everyone's lives. Under the silver glow of a crescent moon, Donovan's limousine glided up to Beauclair Mansion's gates. The estate's sweeping landscape looked hauntingly beautiful. Tall cypress trees swayed, and the ornate fountain at the entrance sparkled with watery moonbeams. Serena leaned against Donovan in the back seat, her manicured nails lightly tracing patterns on his arm. She giggled. "I can't believe you own all of this. It's like a castle from a fairy tale." "Wait until you see the inside," Donovan bragged. "Your jaw will drop." He had always wanted to show off Beauclair to Serena. It was one of his ultimate trophies, a testament to how far he'd climbed from his humble upbringing. He had told the chauffeur to arrive late, betting that the staff would be minimal at this hour. Normally, Elizabeth might have been at the mansion, but Donovan was confident she was in Manhattan until Monday. He anticipated a weekend of unrestrained passion and indulgence, free from prying eyes and moral repercussions. To ensure privacy, Donovan had earlier texted Mrs. Hathaway, Beauclair's long-standing housekeeper, telling her to take Sunday off. He explained that he had a private gathering with an important client. Mrs. Hathaway dutifully obeyed, leaving only a skeleton crew on night duty. Donovan had also given strict instructions to keep the gates closed and to remain out of sight unless summoned. Everything was orchestrated like a stage play, with Donovan as the star performer. However, Donovan's carefully crafted plan crumbled the moment the limousine approached the circular driveway. The grand double doors of the mansion swung open, and out stepped Elizabeth. Clearly pregnant, her usually gentle face etched with outrage. Her hand rested protectively on her belly, the fabric of her pale blue maternity dress fluttering in the night breeze. The overhead carriage lights illuminated her figure, making her look both ethereal and formidable. Donovan felt his breath catch in his throat. Confusion and dread erupted within him. For a moment, Serena was just as stupefied, her eyes darting between Donovan and the furious woman on the threshold. "Who is that?" she whispered sharply, though deep down she suspected the answer. No one spoke as the driver opened the door. Donovan stepped out first, feeling as though he were walking into a vortex of shame and disbelief. Elizabeth's voice finally cut through the silence. "So it's true," she hissed. "All the late nights, the secret phone calls, I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid." Donovan opened his mouth but couldn't form words. Elizabeth's expression twisted a lethal mix of heartbreak and anger. Her gaze flicked to Serena, who also emerged from the limousine, her face partially hidden by large designer sunglasses she'd neglected to remove. For a second, Serena contemplated slinking back inside the car, but she was too frozen to move. Beneath the mansion's elegant facade, the entire world was about to unravel. Inside Beauclair's sweeping foyer, marbled floors gleamed under a chandelier of crystal teardrops. Donovan stood rooted near the grand staircase, Serena a few feet behind him, feeling acutely like an intruder. Elizabeth, with tears in her eyes, demanded answers. Her voice echoed off the polished surfaces, driving home the magnitude of this confrontation. "How long has this been going on?" she shouted, eyes locked on Donovan. "How many times have you lied to me?" Serena's gaze darted nervously. She cleared her throat and decided on an apology, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I'm so sorry." I didn't realize Elizabeth cut her off. Didn't realize what exactly? That he has a wife? That I'm carrying his children? Her voice trembled with bitterness, and her hands pressed against her swollen belly. Donovan finally snapped out of his stupor. "Elizabeth!" He began stepping closer. "I didn't mean for any of this." She pulled away, tears shimmering on the brink. "Don't come near me." At that moment, thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt as though nature itself lamented the betrayal unfolding within Beauclair's walls. Donovan's mind churned, searching for a plausible explanation, an apology, a gesture that might quell the fury and heartbreak swirling through the foyer. Yet nothing he could say would excuse what he'd done. Behind him, Serena said softly, "I'll just get my things and go." She aimed for an exit strategy, hoping to salvage any shred of dignity. But Elizabeth wasn't done. "So you leave now, and what then? Another rendezvous in some penthouse next week? Another weekend in a mansion you both think you own?" She shot Donovan a look of pure venom. "You want to embarrass me in front of the entire world, Donovan, because the paparazzi will eat this alive. There's no hiding from it." A hush enveloped them, broken only by the faint pitter-patter of rain starting outside. Serena gripped her handbag, panic in her eyes. Donovan realized in that instant the severity of his situation. A pregnant wife, a mistress, and a public image that could collapse under the weight of scandal. Before anyone could speak again, Elizabeth crumpled to her knees, a sharp cry escaping her lips. Donovan rushed to her side, alarmed. "Elizabeth!" he exclaimed. "What's wrong?" Her face contorted in pain, her arms instinctively encircling her belly. I think something's wrong with the babies." The sight of Elizabeth in apparent distress jolted Donovan's paternal instincts. He forgot about Serena, about the affair, about everything else. He scooped Elizabeth into his arms. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said, voice trembling. At his instruction, the still-present chauffeur quickly rearranged plans to drive to the nearest emergency room. By now, Serena was shaking, unsure if she should stay or slip out unnoticed. Ultimately, she followed them to the limousine perched uncomfortably in the back seat, while Donovan cradled Elizabeth. The ride felt like an eternity each second, thick with tension and fear. Never had Donovan felt so powerless. This was not a financial crisis he could fix with a quick injection of capital or a brilliant stock trade. He was on the brink of losing everything he claimed mattered to him, and possibly even losing the unborn children he had so carelessly taken for granted. They arrived at St. Bernardine's Medical Center in the dead of night, the doors of the emergency ward sliding open under harsh fluorescent lights. Nurses rushed Elizabeth into an examination room, Donovan trailing closely behind. He hovered by her side, watching with dread as monitors beeped and doctors administered IV lines. Serena lingered in the waiting area, hands clasped tightly, face pale. She felt starkly out of place. A nurse, noticing her anxious demeanor, whispered, Are you family? Serena shook her head, barely managing a polite smile. She took a seat, struggling with a mix of guilt, fear, and resentment. Resentment toward Donovan for putting her in this humiliating position. Guilt for playing a role in what might be a catastrophic medical emergency. Inside the examination room, the obstetrician delivered cautious news. Elizabeth was having contractions prematurely, possibly triggered by emotional stress. The babies were at risk if her blood pressure didn't stabilize soon. Donovan felt a crushing weight. This was the real consequence of his duplicity. Not just an angry spouse or a ruined social reputation, but the potential harm to innocent lives. With quiet efficiency, Elizabeth was transferred to a private room in the maternity wing. Donovan sat by her bedside, stroking her hand, feeling both helpless and regretful. He tried to speak to offer some comfort, but Elizabeth flinched away. Her eyes flickered with pain and betrayal. She was a woman who had given her heart, body, and trust to a man who'd taken all three for granted. Hours crawled by. The hospital's white corridors and antiseptic odor provided the backdrop for Donovan's introspection. He had always prided himself on having control over markets, over deals, over his life's narrative. Yet here he was, powerless. In the waiting area, Serena wrestled with her own turmoil. She texted a friend. Stuck at a hospital. Disaster night. Call you later. She couldn't bring herself to leave. A part of her needed closure, needed Donovan to acknowledge her. But as dawn approached, she realized how naive that longing was. She overheard bits of conversation between nurses. Elizabeth was stabilized, the twins appeared unharmed for now. But the emotional damage was incalculable. Eventually, Donovan emerged from Elizabeth's room, dark circles under his eyes. He approached Serena, who stood up hastily, her posture stiff. In the empty corridor, they exchanged hushed words. Are you okay? Serena asked, her voice trembling with concern. Not really. Donovan admitted, his tone frayed. Elizabeth's resting now. The babies seem to be okay, but it was close. I can't. He swallowed, unable to complete the thought. Serena nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. I didn't want this to happen. Donovan let out a shaky breath. Go back to the mansion. Or a hotel. I'll make arrangements for you. But I can't leave Elizabeth. Serena searched his face, hoping for some signal that their relationship mattered. Instead, she saw a broken man, guilt-ridden and desperate to cling to his wife and unborn children. Words felt futile. She only managed a nod, before turning to walk away, the corridor lights flickering overhead like a silent judgment. In that moment, Donovan understood that the life he thought he could compartmentalize was shattered. There would be no neat division between his respectable existence with Elizabeth and his clandestine affair with Serena. Everything had collided, and the fallout would test every inch of his fortitude and Elizabeth's. News travels fast in privileged circles. By mid-morning, Elizabeth's parents, Andrew and Caroline Radcliffe, arrived at the hospital in a flurry of concern and indignation. Caroline, her posture ramrod straight, confronted Donovan in the corridor. "You liar!" she hissed, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You made promises, Donovan. My daughter's life and the lives of my grandchildren are at risk because of your disgraceful behavior." Andrew, a gentleman by nature, seemed older and more frail than usual, grief etching lines across his face. "I trusted you," he said softly, his voice laden with disappointment. "You were the one who insisted on waiting for children until you were ready to be a father. and now this Donovan bowed his head, too ashamed to meet their gazes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Truly I am. Nothing I say will justify what happened." Caroline gave a scornful laugh. "That's about the only honest thing you've said so far." With Elizabeth stable but emotionally shattered, the medical staff advised minimal stress to prevent another crisis. It was agreed that for now, Donovan could stay at the hospital. He was, after all, Elizabeth's next of kin, but the Radcliffes made it clear they'd watch him like hawks. Every hour, Donovan checked in on Elizabeth, who maintained a stony silence. She gazed out the window, tears occasionally sliding down her cheeks. Sometimes Donovan tried to hold her hand or whisper an apology. Each time, she pulled away. When evening arrived, the Radcliffes insisted on a family discussion without Elizabeth. Donovan, Andrew, and Caroline convened in a small hospital cafeteria, the smell of coffee and antiseptic heavy in the air. The conversation was tense voices, kept to a low hush. Caroline wasted no time. "Donovan, we want you to leave Elizabeth alone until she recovers. You'll take care of her medical expenses, of course, but you're to stay away until she explicitly asks for you." "Understood." Donovan's mouth felt dry. "Elizabeth is my wife. I can't abandon her in the hospital." Andrew softened his tone. "We're not saying abandon her. We're saying give her space. Right now, your presence might be doing more harm than good." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "Who knows how many indiscretions you've had behind her back? As far as I'm concerned, you have a lot of explaining to do." "Yes," Andrew agreed. "And perhaps to a divorce lawyer as well." The word divorce lodged like a bullet in Donovan's chest. He'd never considered that Elizabeth might actually leave him and take the children with her. The possibility ripped open a chasm of fear. At that moment, Donovan realized how precarious his entire empire was. Losing Elizabeth didn't just mean losing the facade of a happy marriage. It could also mean losing the moral anchor that had partially legitimatized his high society persona. Without Elizabeth, Donovan Pierce was just another scheming, heartless tycoon with questionable ethics and no family to give him depth or redemption. "Please," he murmured, voice raw. "Don't talk of divorce yet. Let me do whatever it takes to earn her trust back." Caroline exhaled sharply. "That's up to Elizabeth. For now, respect her wishes. If she wants to see you, fine. If she doesn't, you'll keep away." Donovan nodded, too grief-stricken to argue. The only thing that mattered now was Elizabeth's health and the safety of the twins. Little by little, he realized the irreparable damage he'd caused. If he ever wanted to regain Elizabeth's love, or even her tolerance, he would have to face an arduous road of restitution, if such a thing was even possible. The weekend passed in a blur. Elizabeth showed signs of improvement, though her emotional wounds were far from healed. Donovan took Caroline's advice and stayed mostly away, visiting briefly when Elizabeth gave the green light. He spent his nights at a penthouse suite in a nearby hotel, making calls to business associates and cancelling all non-essential trips. Serena Quinn, meanwhile, disappeared from his immediate orbit. He'd arranged for her to stay in a luxurious suite at the Ritz-Carlton, and he covered the tab without question. Their exchanges were reduced to terse text messages. She resented being sidelined, but had no choice. During this tumultuous period, Donovan discovered that personal crises had a way of exposing hidden vulnerabilities in his business empire. A damaging rumor circulated that he was stepping away from Pierce Capital Management due to family issues. Boards of directors, already anxious about market fluctuations, began to question the stability of Donovan's leadership. Some clients hinted they might shift their funds elsewhere, if Donovan couldn't personally oversee their accounts. In the midst of these professional woes, Donovan received an unexpected visitor, Rita Halberd, a young journalist from a prominent financial magazine. Rita had sensed the scandal swirling around the Pierce household and wanted an exclusive story. She cornered Donovan in the hospital lobby, a polite but determined expression on her face. "Mr. Pierce, I'm so sorry to bother you at this difficult time." She began pressing the record button on her phone. "But rumors are circulating about trouble in your personal life affecting your company. Is there any comment you'd like to make?" Donovan forced a composed smile. "I don't discuss personal matters with the press, Miss Halberd. My family is my priority right now. Pierce Capital Management remains fully operational." Rita persisted. "Any truth to the allegations about an affair causing your wife's hospitalization?" His jaw clenched. No comment. When a security guard intervened, escorting Rita away, Donovan felt a jolt of dread. Despite his best attempts to keep the scandal under wraps, the story was leaking. He later discovered that paparazzi photos of him and Serena in Monte Carlo had been making rounds online, fueling speculation. The worst part was that Elizabeth's heartbreak was now tabloid fodder. Back at Beauclair Mansion, Elizabeth returned to recuperate under medical supervision. Her parents insisted on staying with her, but she also had some quiet moments to reflect. Late one afternoon, Elizabeth found her way to a seldom-used drawing room lined with dusty oil paintings of the estate's previous owners. There she sank into a velvet armchair, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. Her mind replayed the last few days, the confrontation, the hospital, scare, the taste of betrayal. She recalled times when Donovan had been tender and loving, such as the night he proposed. He had taken her to a small island off the coast of Croatia, where they strolled along a moonlit beach. He promised her a life of wonder and fulfillment. Now those sweet memories clashed with the stinging reality of his infidelity. She wondered if she had been naive, ignoring subtle warning signs all along. The late-night calls, the new cologne that smelled nothing like Donovan's usual preference, the random missing hours he could never fully explain. Perhaps she should have confronted him sooner. Perhaps she should have demanded he slow down, focus on their marriage before it was too late. But regrets, she realized, could never undo the present. In a small burst of determination, Elizabeth pressed a hand against her belly. The twins moved gently, as if sensing her emotions. She whispered, "We'll be okay. With or without him, we'll make it." For all her heartbreak, Elizabeth realized she wasn't powerless. She had the children to think about, and her own dignity. If Donovan thought he could just walk in and out of their lives at will, he was mistaken. Serena Quinn, temporarily sequestered in the Ritz-Carlton, found that the novelty of plush robes and room service quickly waned when tethered to a scandal. She felt like a caged bird, feeding on scraps of reassurance from Donovan's sporadic texts. "We'll talk soon," he would say, or "Need time to handle family matters." Weeks ago, Serena would have found these messages acceptable, even promising. Now they felt dismissive. She resented being treated as an inconvenient afterthought. One evening, in a fit of frustration, she sought out an old friend in the city, a PR specialist named Miranda Vale. Over cocktails, Serena vented about her predicament, the broken promises, the mansion fiasco, and her uncertain future. Miranda listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding or taking a sip of her martini. "You're so worried about Donovan's image," Miranda observed. "But what about yours? You stand to lose modeling contracts if this scandal blows up. Or you might actually use it to your advantage if you play your cards right." Serena bristled. She wasn't looking to become some gossip sensation. Yet the suggestion swirled in her mind. How could she salvage her own life? Maybe even elevate her status from this mess. A few days later, Miranda set up a clandestine meeting with a tabloid journalist, Kevin Brown, who was offering top dollar for an exclusive interview from the other woman. Serena vacillated. Did she really want to risk Donovan's wrath by selling their story? But the more Donovan ignored her calls, and the more anxious she felt about her livelihood, the more tempting the offer became. Finally, after one particularly icy text from Donovan, "I can't talk right now." "Please stop calling," Serena snapped. She had built her entire adult life on leveraging opportunities. Why should Donovan Pierce escape unscathed, preserving his marriage and reputation, while leaving her hung out to dry? So Serena met with Kevin Brown in a posh rooftop lounge, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf to hide her identity. She demanded a sizable sum for any details about her affair with Donovan Pierce. Kevin, practically salivating at the prospect of a sensational scoop, agreed. Over hours and multiple drinks, Serena spilled enough intimate details to fuel a front-page headline in every major tabloid. She revealed their first meeting in Monaco, the hush-hush texts, the gifts, the clandestine weekends. The only thing she kept vague was the fiasco at Beauclair Mansion. Some details, she reasoned, might prove too dangerous or humiliating if fully exposed. By the time she left, the weight on Serena's shoulders felt partially lifted. She knew the story would break soon, that Donovan would likely feel betrayed and furious. But she also knew she needed to watch out for her own interests. If Donovan wasn't going to make good on his unspoken promises, if he was going to return to Elizabeth and freeze Serena out, then maybe Serena could seize control of the narrative. In a world where wealth and reputation meant everything public sympathy could be leveraged, perhaps in the end, she'd emerge from the scandal not as a regretful mistress, but as a cunning survivor. A week later, the tabloids erupted with headlines. Exclusive model Serena Quinn speaks out on Donovan Pierce affair. The public devoured every detail like vultures on fresh carrion. Pictures of Serena in Monaco in Donovan's penthouse and near Beauclair Mansion splashed across websites and social media feeds. Gossip shows debated the morality of powerful men who think they can have it all. Stock pundits speculated whether Pierce Capital Management would suffer a mass exodus of clients. Donovan woke up to a flurry of panicked calls from business partners, lawyers, and friends. Fury coursed through him at Serena's betrayal. He drafted multiple messages to her, each more accusatory than the last. But he never pressed send. He understood that escalation could lead to more damaging revelations. Instead, he pivoted into damage control, a meeting with his legal team to discuss defamation suits, a press statement asserting that personal matters do not affect the integrity of Pierce Capital's mission, and frantic phone calls to major stakeholders reassuring them he was still firmly at the helm. Elizabeth, meanwhile, read the tabloids with disgust and heartbreak. She had heard enough from Donovan's admissions and the partial truths gleaned from staff at Beauclair. But seeing Serena's smug face on the covers made it all more real. Her parents tried to shield her from the media storm, but the magnitude was impossible to ignore. At one point, Elizabeth snapped at Caroline. "No more. I don't want to hear or see anything about that woman. It's my life, my marriage. I'll decide how to handle it." Yet a part of Elizabeth felt a strange, unexpected relief. The entire truth was now out there, no more secrets lurking. Donovan's humiliating betrayal was an open wound. Sometimes honesty, even when dragged unwillingly into the public eye, can mark the beginning of genuine healing or a definitive end. A few days into the media circus, Donovan managed to speak privately with Elizabeth at Beauclair. She was seated in the sunroom, a blanket over her lap, the warm glow of afternoon light shining through large glass windows. Her pregnancy was still precarious, but stable. A nurse milled about, ensuring Elizabeth's comfort. Donovan took a seat across from her, hands clasped. He looked thinner than usual, his eyes hollow with regret. "Elizabeth," he began, voice quivering. "I know I can never fully undo what I've done. But I want you to know I'm willing to do anything to make this right." She regarded him with a calmness that unnerved him. "You can't unbreak a heart, Donovan," she replied. "You can only see what grows from the pieces left behind." He swallowed hard, remembering the luminous woman he had married. The thought of losing her and the children shredded whatever bravado remained. "I'm committed to therapy, to counseling, anything you need. You and the twins are my priority now. I understand if you hate me, or if you'll never trust me again. But I want to try." Elizabeth let out a slow exhale. "I don't have answers yet. I need time to figure out what's best for me, and for our children. Right now, I need stability, no more public scandals, no more late-night cat-and-mouse games." "Can you promise me that much?" "Yes," Donovan whispered, tears pricking his eyes. "I promise." Elizabeth nodded. "Then give me space. Provide what I need for the babies and me. Maybe in time, we'll see if there's anything left of this marriage to salvage." Donovan rose to leave, feeling the smallest glimmer of hope. He bent down gently, kissed Elizabeth's forehead. She didn't resist, but neither did she reciprocate. He walked away with a reverent hush in his chest, determined to do better, uncertain if redemption was truly within reach. The next several months were a crucible of transformation for everyone involved. Elizabeth stayed at Beauclair Mansion, supported by private nurses and her parents. She meticulously prepared for the twins' arrival, reading parenting books, setting up a nursery, and confiding in a therapist recommended by her obstetrician. She recognized that despite Donovan's betrayal, her children deserved a father if he could prove worthy. Yet she also realized she was no longer the passive partner she might once have been. She contacted divorce lawyers, not as a definitive move, but as a precaution. Boundaries had to be drawn. Donovan embarked on a public apology tour, though not the typical kind with press conferences. Instead, he quietly reached out to key figures in his professional circle, explaining that he was going through a personal crisis and assuring them of his unwavering commitment to Pierce Capital. He donated a significant sum to maternal health charities, a gesture partly inspired by guilt, partly by a genuine desire to mend the harm. In a rare display of humility, he sought out a private counselor, a stepsister of a friend. Sessions were grueling, forcing him to confront his reckless impulses, his childhood insecurities, and the toxic pursuit of wealth as a balm for every emotion. He began to see that the same drive that made him a financial success had also corroded his personal life. Serena, meanwhile, found herself both famous and infamous. She was approached by multiple agencies to exploit her new celebrity, but serious brands viewed her as a liability. She capitalized on her notoriety by launching a line of low-tier beauty products, hawked relentlessly on social media. Certain tabloids praised her for bravery in exposing a billionaire, but the more discerning corners of society labeled her a shameless opportunist. She struggled with the knowledge that she might never escape the shadow of this scandal. On lonely nights in her new penthouse, a parting gift from a short-lived romance with another wealthy patron, she questioned whether she had really gained anything from this affair, or simply sabotaged her own integrity. As for the public, the scandal became old news once another sensational headline captured their short attention span: Donovan Pierce and Elizabeth Radcliffe. Pierce were yesterday's gossip replaced by new controversies. However, the financial world did not forget so quickly. Donovan faced extra scrutiny in every new venture. Some of his bolder clients grew leery, no longer seeing him as infallible. He moved carefully, treading water to maintain his empire's stability, while balancing the turbulent waters of his personal life. On a chilly December evening, months after the scandal first broke, Elizabeth went into labor. The staff at Beauclair hustled, calling the doctor and preparing to take her to the hospital. Donovan, who was in Manhattan finalizing a major business deal, was alerted immediately. Without hesitation, he dropped everything. He had a private helicopter on standby for emergencies, and this was certainly one. Within an hour, Donovan arrived at the hospital breathless and terrified. He found Elizabeth already in the delivery room, her face contorted with pain, her parents at her side. She spotted Donovan, and a fleeting look of relief crossed her features before another contraction seized her. All through the grueling hours, Donovan held Elizabeth's hand. Each time she cried out, he whispered words of encouragement, telling her how strong she was, how close they were to finally holding their children. If she bore any lingering resentment, it was eclipsed by the primal, overwhelming task of giving birth. At precisely 2:14 a.m., the first baby emerged a boy, with tiny flailing limbs and a robust cry. The doctor smiled. "He's healthy," she announced, placing the newborn on Elizabeth's chest. A minute later, his twin sister followed, smaller, but equally vocal about her entrance into the world. Donovan was unable to contain his tears as he beheld his children for the first time. He kissed Elizabeth's forehead, flooding with gratitude, regret, and awe all at once. Elizabeth turned to look at him, tears in her own eyes, and gave a single nod of acknowledgement. It was too soon to say if forgiveness was in the cards, but at that moment they were bound by the pure miracle of these new lives. In the weeks following the twins' birth, a cautious détente settled over Beauclair Mansion. Elizabeth allowed Donovan to stay in a guest suite. He took paternal leave from Pierce Capital, focusing on midnight feedings, diaper changes, and singing lullabies. The cracks in their relationship remained, but caring for their infants forged a tenuous bridge. The twins, named Alexander and Amelia, became the center of everyone's world. Donovan discovered that holding these fragile beings in his arms gave him a sense of purpose far beyond financial gain. Some nights he'd find Elizabeth gazing at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at how dedicated a father he'd become. Other nights, tensions rose particularly when the memory of his betrayal loomed. But the babies acted as a balm, reminding both parents that they had two tiny reasons to try. Elizabeth's parents helped, but eventually they returned to their own estate, trusting that Elizabeth was strong enough now to stand on her own. A wave of quiet negotiations began between Elizabeth's legal team and Donovan's lawyers' discussions about trusts for the children, potential separation agreements, property, settlements. Yet Elizabeth remained non-committal about a final decision. She sought more clarity on Donovan's sincerity before making her choice. At times, Donovan found himself on the edge of losing patience. He wanted redemption, wanted Elizabeth to declare that they could fully reconcile. But each time he felt that eagerness, he reminded himself that trust once shattered cannot be hastily mended. He forced himself to give Elizabeth space to keep proving day by day that he could be the man she and their children deserved. And so life took on a quiet rhythm. Nighttime feedings under the mansion's vaulted ceilings, squeals of newborn laughter in the morning, and guarded conversations in the afternoon. Donovan learned that fatherhood wasn't just a new label, it was an all-consuming transformative role. And Elizabeth, for all her heartbreak, found moments of solace watching Donovan cradle their infants, singing lullabies in a soft, unsteady voice she'd never heard from him before. Winter gradually yielded to spring, bringing fresh growth to Beauclair's gardens. Sunlight filtered through newly budded branches, and the estate's fountain sparkled under warmer skies. The twins reached 3 months old, their personalities beginning to blossom. Alexander was feisty, always squirming, while Amelia was calmer, observing the world with large, curious eyes. One afternoon, after putting the twins down for a nap, Donovan and Elizabeth found themselves alone in the mansion's reading room. The subdued light cast gentle shadows on the library shelves. It was the first time in weeks they'd had a private moment uninterrupted by crying babies or house staff. Elizabeth studied Donovan for a long moment. "I've seen a change in you," she said quietly. He felt his chest tighten. "I've never been more serious about anything. These months with the twins with you, they've shown me what really matters." Elizabeth pressed her lips together, tears threatening to surface. "I don't trust you fully yet," she admitted, voice trembling. "But I see you trying. And I care that our children have a real family." Donovan reached for her hand. She allowed him to take it this time, though her grip was tentative. "I love you," he said with fervor. "I always have in my own flawed way." She closed her eyes, letting tears slip through. In that vulnerable moment, Elizabeth acknowledged that despite the immense pain Donovan had caused, she still loved him too. Love wasn't a neat equation. It was messy, painful, beautiful, and worth fighting for sometimes. No magical instant of absolute forgiveness followed. Instead, they shared a deep, trembling embrace. Perhaps it was the start of building anew, or maybe a final farewell. But for that moment, it was enough to close the distance that had been tearing them apart. Over time, marriage counseling sessions were arranged. Trust exercises, honest conversations, and raw confessions filled many evenings. Donovan penned a heartfelt letter to Elizabeth, acknowledging every lie and vow he had broken. Elizabeth read it through tears, then wrote a response describing her own fears and disappointments. Though the future remained uncertain, both were willing to try. For the sake of the twins, for the sake of their own hearts, they forged ahead, cautious, hopeful, and forever changed. Months passed gradually, healing old wounds, though scars lingered. Donovan and Elizabeth decided to continue living at Beauclair, turning it into a sanctuary rather than a battlefield. The staff treated Donovan with polite reserve, aware of the rift in the household, but also noticing the genuine effort he invested in fatherhood. Serena Quinn drifted to the periphery of their lives. She launched a small cosmetics brand online, capitalizing on her short-lived tabloid fame, but her presence receded from major headlines. Donovan never reached out to her, and she, sensing no benefit to further contact, eventually moved on to new opportunities. Rumors linked her to an international art dealer, but the story never garnered much attention. In time, the media found fresh scandals to chase. Donovan's public persona stabilized as he demonstrated consistent leadership in his company, all the while making philanthropic gestures, no doubt influenced by Elizabeth's passions. Some cynics claimed he was simply buying redemption, but those closer to him sensed that fatherhood and near loss had sparked a more meaningful shift. Elizabeth remained cautious. Though she allowed Donovan back into her bed, she set firm boundaries about honesty and transparency. She demanded and received proof of Donovan's finances, phone records, and schedules. Some nights guilt gnawed at Donovan. He realized how easily he used to lie and manipulate. Now each day of truth felt like a small victory. In the hush of dawn, Donovan often rose to check on Alexander and Amelia. He found solace in their innocent breathing, their tiny bodies nestled securely in cribs. As he watched them, he whispered apologies for his past and promises for their future. Each promise was a vow to be better, a father they could respect, a husband Elizabeth could count on. Exactly 1 year after Donovan's fateful return to Beauclair, with Serena in tow, Elizabeth woke before sunrise. She gazed at Donovan sleeping beside her, his hair disheveled, his face peaceful in slumber. She slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the twins' nursery. Sunlight broke over the horizon, illuminating Alexander's curious expression and Amelia's gentle coos. Elizabeth scooped them into her arms, one on each hip, and felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her. Shortly after, Donovan entered, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he said softly, placing a tender kiss on each baby's forehead. Then he looked at Elizabeth, searching her face for signs of acceptance. She offered a small smile. The tension that once gripped their every interaction had eased, replaced by a quiet understanding. They carried the twins downstairs to the breakfast table, where the staff prepared a light meal. Over coffee and pureed fruit for the babies, Elizabeth cleared her throat. "I have an announcement," she said, drawing Donovan's full attention. "I'm ready to give us a real chance. No more guest suite, no more half measures. But Donovan, if you ever betray me again, that's it. We're done." He felt the air rush from his lungs, relief washing over him. "I won't. I promise." He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Their eyes locked in a moment of unspoken agreement. Months of therapy, raw conversations, and unwavering devotion to their children had led them here, still bruised but willing to live as a unified family. The rebuilding process had been painstaking each day, a test of Donovan's sincerity and Elizabeth's capacity for forgiveness. In that single instant, they both chose hope over resentment, a future over a fractured past. From the brink of a devastating split to a fragile but genuine renewal, Donovan and Elizabeth's journey reminds us that no life is beyond repair, even in the face of betrayal, heartbreak, and public scandal. Sometimes the hardest lessons come wrapped in pain and regret, but it's how we grow from them that truly defines our story. Through newborn cries and sleepless nights, they discovered a new depth of love and unity, proving that second chances, while never guaranteed, can blossom if nurtured with honesty and perseverance. Have you ever wondered how a single moment, one split second of discovery, could shatter a perfectly crafted facade? This is the story of Sarah Robertson, a devoted wife who believed in the sanctity of love and marriage, only to find herself caught in a whirlwind of betrayal when she stumbled upon her husband's mistress at his office. As she stood there, pregnant and trembling with rage, little did she know that a DNA test lurked in the shadows, poised to devastate everything she thought she knew. Brace yourself for a relentless ride of lies, secrets, and shocking twists that will leave you speechless. Sarah Robertson was no stranger to life's challenges. At 32, she had faced her fair share of heartbreak and setbacks before meeting Richard Johnson, a charismatic investment banker at Allen & Myers Financial Services. When Richard first walked into her life, he seemed to radiate stability, confidence, and a touch of old-fashioned charm. That was 5 years ago. Today, Sarah was sitting by the large bay window in their suburban home, hands resting gently on her growing belly, reflecting on the blessing she was about to bring into the world. The house itself was a symbol of their mutual hard work, a 2-story brick home with a pristine lawn and carefully chosen decor. Friends would comment on how picture-perfect their life seemed. Neighbors smiled at the sight of Sarah's baby bump waving in approval as they jogged or walked their dogs down the quiet streets. On the surface, everything looked idyllic. A glowing wife preparing a nursery, a busy husband providing for his family, and a child on the way. Yet beneath the veneer of a perfect suburban marriage lurked a subtle disquiet. It had started as the faintest flicker of doubt. Those nights Richard would come home late, without a proper explanation, or the weekends he claimed to be catching up on office work, while Sarah battled morning sickness alone. Sarah tried convincing herself it was all temporary. After all, Richard's job was demanding, and they needed to prepare financially for the baby's arrival. Their relationship had blossomed quickly. After a whirlwind romance of less than a year, they got married in an intimate ceremony on a sunny beach in Hawaii. Family and close friends witnessed their vows, tears of joy shining in their eyes. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, was the best man, a tall, boisterous fellow who loved practical jokes but had a heart of gold. Sarah's longtime confidant, Harriet Edwards, served as her maid of honor and had been the first to encourage Sarah to take a leap of faith with Richard. Shortly after the honeymoon, Sarah and Richard settled into the rhythms of daily life. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, worked from a cozy office upstairs. Her flexible schedule allowed her to build a stable clientele while also keeping the house in order. Richard, on the other hand, thrived in the high-stakes world of finance. He could negotiate million-dollar contracts before breakfast and charm his boss into awarding him the heftiest bonuses by lunchtime. However, once Sarah became pregnant, life started shifting. What had once been a comfortable partnership turned into anxious nights and suspicious glances. Sarah found herself scrolling through Richard's social media, looking for signs of hidden messages or flirty interactions. She had yet to find concrete evidence, just a vague sense that something was off. If only she could put her finger on it, Sarah thought as she sat by the window that day. In her heart, she still hoped everything was fine, that the weight of her suspicions was merely the pressure of impending motherhood. But an unshakable feeling told her a storm was brewing, and no carefully curated suburban dream could shelter her from the downpour that was about to come. The first real hint arrived one Friday evening. Sarah was up late designing a client's logo when she heard Richard's car pull into the driveway. It was nearly midnight. Her heart fluttered with relief, but as he stepped through the front door, her relief shifted to alarm. He reeked of expensive perfume, not the kind she wore, and not the kind carried by the air of any bar she knew he frequented after work. "Hey, honey," Richard said with an attempt at casualness, removing his tie and avoiding her eyes. A faint flush crept over his cheeks. In the past, she might have blamed the cold, but it was a balmy night with barely a breeze. Sarah forced a smile. "Late night." "Yeah. We had a few urgent client meetings, then some colleagues wanted to grab drinks," he replied. He kept his explanation succinct, offering no more details than necessary. It felt rehearsed. Curiosity flamed within her. She wanted to press for more details, names of colleagues, location of the bar, but she bit her tongue, not wanting to spark an argument. Pregnancy hormones had been causing tension lately, but deep down she suspected this apprehension was something else entirely. Sarah had enough experience with heartbreak to recognize the signs of evasion. Instead, she reached for a different approach. "You hungry? I kept dinner warm." Richard shook his head. "I'm beat." I'll just shower and head to bed." As he trudged upstairs, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, trying to steady her breath. The faint floral scent of someone else's perfume lingered like a ghost in the foyer. Suspicion took root, its tendrils wrapping around her heart. That night, she lay awake, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The next morning, Sarah decided to confide in Harriet. Over a cup of herbal tea at the local cafe, Harriet listened intently, her brow furrowed. They sat tucked in a corner away from the chatter of other patrons. Harriet was the kind of friend who would never sugarcoat the truth. She had been Sarah's companion through heartbreaks past, including Sarah's broken engagement nearly a decade ago. "Sarah, you have to trust your gut," Harriet said, her voice low yet firm. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. But I don't want to accuse him of anything without proof." Sarah replied anxiously, twisting her wedding ring. "He's under a lot of stress at work, and I know the baby is adding to his worries." Harriet sighed. "I get it. You don't want to start a fight or push him away. But you can't ignore the signs. Keep your eyes open." Over the following days, Sarah did just that. She paid attention to Richard's mood swings, the times he spent on his phone, the frequency of his late meetings. She noticed how he sometimes disappeared into the garage for phone calls. She began to wonder if he was truly just talking to clients. Each suspicious moment piled onto the next, forming a mountain of doubt. Yet Sarah struggled to confront him directly. Part of her was afraid of what she might discover. Another part of her worried about the baby needing Richard's support and their finances in order. But little did she know that her suspicions were about to be validated in a far more dramatic way than she could have ever anticipated. It was a bleak Wednesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. Sarah had spent the morning at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup. The doctor, Dr. Amelia Green, had assured her the pregnancy was progressing normally, and Sarah felt a wave of relief. She thought about surprising Richard at his office with lunch and news of the baby's healthy progress. After all, maybe Harriet was right. Maybe they just needed a little reconnection, something spontaneous to remind them of the love that existed before suspicion took hold. Clutching a paper bag with Richard's favorite tuna salad sandwich, Sarah drove into the city and arrived at Allen & Myers. She walked through the gleaming lobby, giving the receptionist a polite smile. The smell of polished floors and expensive cologne filled the air. Sarah made her way to Richard's floor, a sense of anticipation coursing through her. She pictured the delight on his face when she handed him the lunch, imagining he'd embrace her, declare how thoughtful she was, and maybe they'd talk about baby names. But as the elevator doors opened, Sarah's heart plunged into her stomach. Standing by Richard's office door was a stunning brunette in a tight pencil skirt and a silky blouse, giggling as Richard gently brushed a strand of her hair off her face. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't immediately notice Sarah's arrival. Sarah froze the blood draining from her face, her fingers gripping the paper bag like a lifeline. When Richard finally spotted her, he stiffened. The brunette's face twitched with surprise, and a subtle panic flickered in her eyes. "Sarah." Richard stammered, taking a step back as if the floor had turned to lava. What are you doing here?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was paralyzed by the sight, by the unspoken truth hovering in the room. At last she found her voice. "I wanted to surprise you with lunch, but I see you're already occupied." The woman's nameplate on her desk read, Christine Monroe, and Sarah recalled Harriet mentioning a new hire in Richard's department. Suddenly the perfume Sarah smelled on him made sense. Her cheeks burned at the realization that it was this woman's perfume she'd detected on Richard's suit. Christine offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "I'm sorry. We were just discussing a client pitch." Richard nodded vigorously, attempting to play along. "Yes, just work stuff." Sarah's eyes flicked between the two. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "Right," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. Her gaze dropped to the lunch bag in her hand, which now felt like the cruelest joke. She turned on her heel and left, ignoring Richard's calls for her to wait. In that single moment, all the illusions, excuses, and rationalizations she had clung to were obliterated. The floor around her felt as if it might collapse at any second. She hurried back to the elevator, tears blurring her vision. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow, her mind reeling with questions. Was this a one-time flirtation or a full-blown affair? How long had it been going on? And most crucially, how was she supposed to protect her unborn child from the fallout of this betrayal? Sarah managed to make it home before the tears truly took over. She shut the front door behind her, slid to the floor, and sobbed as muffled screams of anguish escaped her lips. The baby in her womb stirred as if sensing her heart break, prompting her to cradle her belly gently. She realized that no matter how betrayed she felt, her first priority was to remain calm for her unborn child. Still trembling with fury and sorrow, Sarah forced herself into her office, turning on the computer to distract her mind. Within minutes, she found herself searching Christine Monroe's name on social media. There she was. Glamorous photos, multiple posts about late nights at the office, each one racking up likes and flirtatious comments. Sarah's stomach churned at the pictures Christine posing in chic outfits, always sporting that same indulgent smile. Nothing explicit pointed to Richard, but a few cryptic captions about office romance made Sarah's blood boil. That evening around 7:00 p.m., Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Sarah listened to his footsteps as he approached the front door. He entered the house, slowly setting his briefcase down, with a cautious thud, as though he expected to find the place torn apart. Gathering her courage, Sarah stepped into the hallway. The tension between them was palpable. "Sarah," he began, voice tinged with worry. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms protectively over her chest. "Yes, we do." They moved into the living room. Richard tried to take her hand, but she pulled away, refusing to let his touch dilute her anger. He sighed heavily. "Nothing's going on with Christine," he insisted. "She's a junior associate on my team. I've been showing her the ropes. That's it." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Really? Then explain the perfume. On your clothes the late nights, the looks you two shared in your office. Does that all mean nothing?" He opened his mouth to retort, but fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. That hesitation spoke louder than any confession. Sarah swallowed hard, tears threatening to surface again. "Look," Richard muttered finally. "I admit things got complicated. We spent a lot of time together on projects, had some drinks, maybe it crossed a line. But I swear it isn't serious." Sarah shook her head, the anger boiling. "It isn't serious to you because you have a wife and a child on the way. You can pick up and drop these little flings whenever it suits you. But do you have any idea what this does to me? To our family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I love you, Sarah. I'm trying to handle a lot of pressure at work, and I messed up. But you have to believe me, Christine and I. It's not love. It just happened. Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. It just happened, as if betrayal was an accidental slip. Her tears returned in full force, but she refused to crumble in front of him. She took a shaky breath, determined to keep control. "I'm pregnant with our baby," she said, voice quivering. "I have no choice but to fight for us but you. You chose to destroy my trust. If we're going to get through this, you need to end it. Immediately." Richard nodded, though he looked more defeated than sorry. Sarah wanted to scream, to throw something, but she needed to remain as composed as possible. Her voice trembled with resolve. "You'll have to prove to me that this is over, Richard. Otherwise, I'm gone." In the wake of the explosive confrontation, Sarah found herself seeking solace in the company of loved ones. She confided in her older sister, Diana Robertson, a pragmatic attorney who lived only a few miles away. Diana wasted no time inviting Sarah over for a Sunday brunch, hoping to offer both emotional support and legal advice, if it came to that. Seated at Diana's dining table, Sarah took measured sips of orange juice while recounting the events leading up to her discovery in Richard's office. She spoke of perfume, late nights, and the image of Christine Monroe's flirtatious gaze. Diana listened carefully, her expression grim. "It sounds like you have enough to believe he's been unfaithful," Diana said at last, placing a comforting hand over Sarah's. "But the question is, do you still want to fight for this marriage?" Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't know. I keep thinking about the baby. Growing up with divorced parents isn't easy. But I also can't keep living with this weight on my heart." Diana nodded. "If you decide to separate, you should be prepared financially and emotionally. But if you choose to stay, he has to work for it. He must cut ties with that woman immediately." Later that same day, Harriet dropped by Sarah's house, bearing homemade lasagna and unwavering moral support. Harriet was incensed by Richard's behavior. "How dare he put you through this, especially when you're pregnant?" she fumed. Sarah shook her head, tears threatening once again. "I feel so torn, Harriet. One moment I want to pack my bags and leave the next. I remember that I still love him. And then there's this baby." With a determined look, Harriet squeezed her friend's hand. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Meanwhile, Richard faced his own reckoning. His parents, Walter and Margaret Johnson, were old-fashioned in their views on marriage and family. They had always adored Sarah for her kindness and believed that once a man pledged his vows, he was to honor them. When Margaret learned of the situation through Diana's concerned phone call, she immediately summoned Richard to their cozy lakeside bungalow. Sitting in the living room, Richard tried to defend himself, but his mother's reproachful stare cut him short. Margaret spoke quietly. "Richard, how could you do this to Sarah? She's pregnant with your child. Have you forgotten your responsibilities?" Walter, a retired school principal, removed his glasses and fixed his son with a stern gaze. "We thought we raised you better. Marriage isn't just about the good times. It's about commitment, especially during hardships." Richard sighed. "I know. I messed up and I regret it. But Sarah and I haven't been close for months. She's so consumed with the pregnancy and I felt alone." Margaret bristled. "That's no excuse. You have to fix this. If Christine's truly out of your life, you must prove it. Otherwise, you'll lose Sarah and our grandchild before they even have a chance to know you." His parents' disapproval hit Richard hard. That night, as he drove back to the house he shared with Sarah, he felt the full weight of the mess he had created. Regret gnawed at him, but so did a lingering question. Was his connection to Christine really something he could just bury? Behind the polished facade of Christine Monroe's ambition lay a tangled mix of emotions. Although she'd carefully curated her online persona, her personal life was far from picture-perfect. She had grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, watching her father abandon her mother when she was only 10. Christine vowed to build a life of independence and success so she would never have to rely on anyone who might walk away. When she moved to the city to work at Allen & Myers, she was determined to climb the corporate ladder. She networked relentlessly, volunteered for demanding projects, and never hesitated to do whatever it took to stand out. In Richard Johnson, she found a mentor who recognized her potential. Their professional rapport initially flourished late-night brainstorming sessions, conference calls with high-profile clients, celebratory drinks after sealing a deal. Over time, the line between mentorship and personal involvement blurred. Christine was drawn to Richard's confidence, his laughter, the way he could make her feel seen in a sea of colleagues. She knew he was married, but at first she told herself it was harmless, just a little flirtation. Gradually she sought him out more frequently, confiding in him about her dreams and insecurities. Richard, feeling the pressures at home and work, lapped up the attention. Soon, stolen glances became lingering touches, and the occasional after-work drink turned into an intimate rendezvous. Yet Christine was no wide-eyed innocent. She understood she was meddling in another woman's marriage, but rationalized it with her own heartbreak. I'm not the reason their relationship is failing. It must have already been broken. Deep down, she realized she was repeating the cycle she'd witnessed as a child, someone bridging the gap left by a troubled marriage. But she believed she deserved a chance at happiness, even if it meant stepping over invisible lines. That Wednesday afternoon, when Sarah showed up unannounced at the office, Christine felt her world tilt dangerously. Richard's wife was younger and prettier than she'd expected, her eyes filled not just with anger, but also with raw pain. Christine had stood there, her heart pounding as Richard raced after his wife. She knew the fantasy bubble had burst. In the days that followed, Christine waited for Richard to reach out to offer comfort or reassurance. But he distanced himself, returning her calls, only to discuss urgent office matters. His manner was cold, efficient, and painfully detached. A part of Christine raged at the injustice. How dare he cut me off when he was an equal participant in this affair? Another part of her felt the sharp pangs of guilt. She imagined Sarah's tear-streaked face and the child growing inside her. One evening, Christine found herself alone in her upscale apartment, a glass of wine in hand. She scrolled through countless photos, rereading messages that once felt exciting. Now they stung with regret. She contemplated resigning from Allen & Myers, but her pride and ambition loomed. Why should she sacrifice her hard-earned position? Thus a storm brewed within Christine Monroe, a conflict between her desire for professional success, her lingering feelings for Richard, and her conscience nagging her about the pregnant woman she had wronged. Little did she know the next developments would force her to confront the consequences of her actions in ways she never anticipated. Richard Johnson found himself in a whirlpool of emotions. Each morning, he woke up beside Sarah, feeling the tension coil around them like an invisible rope tightening with every passing day. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and devotion, now bore a guarded gaze that reminded him of his betrayal. He tried to be attentive, waking early to brew her decaffeinated tea offering to drive her to doctor's appointments. But the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Work offered little respite. The once invigorating environment of Allen & Myers felt suffocating. Colleagues whispered about trouble in his personal life, and he couldn't escape Christine's presence. She still excelled at her job, commanding attention and respect from clients. When their paths crossed, an awkward silence replaced the friendly banter they once shared. He'd murmur a quick hello, avoid her eyes, and bury himself in spreadsheets or phone calls. Yet he was haunted by memories of her laughter and the closeness they'd shared. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, tried to intervene. James, who had known Richard since college, invited him out for a beer in hopes of getting him to open up. They ended up at O'Malley's pub, a dimly lit bar where the echo of clinking glasses and murmured conversations created a familiar backdrop. After a swig of beer, James leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Rich, what's going on?" "You're a mess. Talk to me." Richard sighed heavily, rolling the cool bottle between his palms. "I messed up big time, James. Got involved with Christine, and Sarah caught us. She's pregnant, man." "What kind of person does that to his pregnant wife?" James shook his head, empathy and reprimand mingling in his expression. "I'm not here to judge you, but you gotta fix this. Sarah's a good woman, and you're about to be a father." Richard nodded, a wave of guilt washing over him. "I know. I love her. I felt like we weren't connecting and Christine was there offering some excitement. I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," James replied softly. "You might not have meant it, but it happened. Now you have to choose which path you're going to take, and be ready to deal with the consequences." Consequences. The word settled heavily in Richard's chest. He thought about the baby, a tiny heartbeat that he had once eagerly anticipated hearing at every ultrasound. The idea of not being part of that child's everyday life terrified him. He imagined empty cribs and lonely nights in a half-furnished apartment if Sarah kicked him out. The vision stabbed at his heart. On the drive home, Richard pondered his options. On one side there was Sarah and their unborn child, a family that once represented hope and stability. On the other side there was Christine, dangerously appealing, yet complicated the living embodiment of a mistake he could not take back. Perhaps if he truly ended it with Christine, he could salvage his marriage. But a sneaking question remained. Would Sarah ever truly forgive him? Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind whirling with regret and longing. He knew time was running out. Every day he delayed taking decisive action, he risked losing the life he once cherished. A month passed, steeped in tension and guarded conversations. Sarah's suspicions simmered, despite Richard's half-hearted attempts to show he was done with Christine. The situation came to a head when Harriet introduced a startling question. "Are you absolutely sure the baby is Richard's?" At first, Sarah was offended by the suggestion, but Harriet raised an uncomfortable point. Richard's unwavering suspicion that the baby's due date seemed off. Indeed, Richard had once casually mentioned that he couldn't recall Sarah's exact last menstrual period date. As if the stress of the affair wasn't enough, the spectre of doubt about paternity cast a new cloud over their already shaky relationship. Sarah felt both insulted and fearful. She'd never been unfaithful, but the seeds of uncertainty had been planted. Caught in a storm of worry, Sarah decided to take control of the narrative. She approached Richard with a proposition, a prenatal DNA test. "Let's settle this once and for all." She said, arms crossed defensively. "I have nothing to hide, and if it'll give you peace of mind, then so be it." Richard hesitated. On the one hand, if he learned the baby was indeed his, it might force him to face his guilt with no room for denial. On the other hand, a tiny part of him fed by his own insecurities wondered if Sarah had grown closer to someone else during their marital distance. The tension between them and the consistent presence of Harriet or Diana in Sarah's life gave him irrational twinges of jealousy. Eventually, he agreed. They went together to a specialized prenatal clinic recommended by Diana. The process was straightforward, a simple blood draw from Sarah and a cheek swab from Richard. The results would take a week, and those 7 days felt like an eternity, suspended in doubt. During that week, Sarah struggled with waves of anxiety. She knew she had been faithful, yet the test symbolized more than just paternity. It represented their crumbling trust. Every time Richard left the house, she braced herself for another betrayal. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected a message from Christine, flaunting her hold on Richard. On day 6, Sarah and Richard sat in tense silence in the living room, replaying the last few months in their minds. She was picking at the hem of her maternity blouse, while he stared blankly at the muted television. Suddenly, Richard's phone lit up a message from the clinic, stating their results were ready. Heart pounding, they agreed to go in person the next morning. Walking into the clinic, they were greeted by a nurse with a sympathetic smile, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. They were ushered into a small consultation room. A doctor wearing a crisp white coat entered with a folder. She cleared her throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the prenatal paternity test results are conclusive." She handed them a piece of paper. Richard scanned the words quickly, his eyes widening. He handed the paper to Sarah, who read it in equal shock. The test declared Richard was not the biological father. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah gaped at the words, rereading them, the breath knocked out of her. She felt as if the floor gave way beneath her feet. Richard stared, disbelieving. Every ounce of suspicion he'd harbored suddenly flared while Sarah felt a surge of protest in her heart. "This can't be right. This is impossible." Sarah left the clinic in a daze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard marched beside her, his face a mixture of triumph and pain, as though he'd been both vindicated and mortally wounded. The drive home was excruciating. Neither spoke the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. As soon as they stepped into the house, the accusations flew. "What the hell, Sarah?" Richard roared, slamming the front door shut. "You said you had nothing to hide." Sarah, reeling, fought to steady her voice. "I don't know how this happened. I swear I wasn't with anyone else." "Don't lie," he snapped, tears brimming in his own eyes. "The test is conclusive." "Sarah, conclusive." She gasped, feeling the walls of her world crumble. Was the test faulty? Could there have been a mix-up at the lab? She struggled to articulate her confusion, but Richard's rage was relentless. "I stood by you," he snarled. "I tried to fix this marriage, even after my mistake. And now I find out you betrayed me." Sarah trembled, pressing her hands over her ears as if to block the harrowing words. "Richard, please. I didn't cheat on you. I can't explain the result, but I'm innocent." Richard gave a hollow laugh. "Innocent? You're telling me the lab made a mistake?" "That's far-fetched, Sarah." Overwhelmed and desperate, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Diana. Barely able to articulate the horror of the situation, within minutes Diana arrived and tried to mediate. Richard showed her the test results, his hands shaking. "It's legally binding, Diana. The doctor said it's as accurate as it gets. So either my sister is lying or there was a lab error." Diana studied the document, her eyes narrow. "We need a second opinion. This result is too bizarre. Sarah swears she's been faithful." Richard snorted, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. "Sure, get another test," he said, "but I'm not sticking around to see how this soap opera ends." Sarah's heart shattered as she watched him pack. She wanted to beg him to stay, to trust her. But what words could she possibly offer now? She was as perplexed as he was. As Richard walked out the door, an icy realization settled over Sarah. Not only had her husband possibly ended their marriage, but her child's paternity was in question, and she had no logical explanation. She sank to the floor, Diana rushing to her side. Diana held her, stroking her hair. "We'll sort this out. We'll get an independent lab to verify. But for now, you need to rest." That night, Sarah cried herself to sleep, unable to shake the sense of betrayal from both sides, her husband's affair with Christine and his refusal to believe in her fidelity. Meanwhile, Richard took refuge at James Peterson's place, wrestling with questions he never thought he'd face. Who was the father of Sarah's child, if not him? And could there be any truth to her pleas of innocence? A week later, Sarah arranged for a second DNA test through a reputable lab recommended by Harriet's cousin, a nurse practitioner. The results wouldn't be back for another 10 days, leaving her in agonizing suspense. Her emotions swung between despair and determination. Each kick from the baby felt like a reminder of the child she loved unconditionally, even if the entire world doubted her story. Richard, still living at James Peterson's apartment, found himself torn. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the tension with Christine in the office escalated. She cornered him in the break room one afternoon, eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "I heard rumors about a paternity test," she said, setting down her coffee mug, "and that you moved out." Richard exhaled heavily. "It's complicated, Christine." Christine studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Look, I'm not here to guilt you, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm willing." He gave her a tired look, recalling how her presence had once offered an escape. Now it just reminded him of everything unraveling in his life. "Thanks, but I'm fine," he said, turning to leave. During his solitude, Richard spent a lot of time reflecting on his marriage. Memories of Sarah's radiant smile at their wedding, the first time they heard the baby's heartbeat, and the countless moments of shared happiness haunted him. He'd betrayed her first, yet now he felt equally betrayed, his trust shattered by a lab result. Still, a small voice whispered, "What if she's telling the truth?" Unsure of what he wanted, Richard called Sarah one evening. She answered, her voice subdued but laced with longing. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "How are you holding up?" She inhaled shakily. "It's hard. The house feels empty without you." His chest tightened. "Look, I'm still angry and confused, but I'm open to talking. Maybe we can meet for coffee." Sarah agreed, her heart cautiously hopeful. They decided on a small cafe, Le Petit Rose, the place where they'd had their first date. The next day they sat across from each other, the gentle hum of other patrons providing a comforting background. Sarah broke the ice. "I appreciate you meeting me. I know things look bad, but I promise I've been faithful. I'm just as baffled by the test result." Richard stared into his coffee. "I don't understand, Sarah. If the test says I'm not the father, how can it be wrong? But a part of me wants to believe you." She reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "I'll do as many tests as it takes to prove it. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even after everything." His eyes glistened with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did with Christine. But this baby, if it's not mine, how do we move forward?" Sarah's voice quavered with desperation. "I don't have the answers yet. But can we at least try to keep communication open until the second results come in?" With a heavy sigh, Richard nodded. "Yes. But let's be honest, if the second test confirms the same thing, I don't know if I can stay." Their attempts at reconciliation were fragile, built on the faint hope that science had made a mistake. Yet lurking behind their forced smiles was the ominous question, what if it wasn't a mistake at all? The day the second DNA test results were scheduled to arrive, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She barely slept the night before, pacing her bedroom, replaying every intimate moment with Richard in her head. There was no one else, she was certain of it. But how to prove what seemed scientifically impossible? Diana accompanied her to the lab, the same official building with sterile white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. A technician handed Sarah an envelope. She trembled as she opened it. Diana's grip on her shoulder tightened in solidarity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The second test yielded the same verdict. Richard was not the father. The paper shook in her hands as she mutely handed it to Diana. The disbelief on Diana's face mirrored Sarah's own. "This doesn't make sense," Diana mumbled. "You've never been with anyone else, right?" "No, never." Sarah whispered, tears welling up. She felt trapped in a nightmare that defied reason. They returned to the car where Sarah broke down in sobs. Diana tried to console her. "We need to get a lawyer involved. Maybe they made a mistake, or the lab is confusing the samples." Sarah's tear-stained face contorted with anguish. "2 labs, 2 identical results. How is that even possible? Unless—" Her voice trailed off. "Unless what?" Diana pressed. Sarah's mind raced. Could she have had a rare medical phenomenon like chimerism, where her own DNA conflicted with the baby's? She'd once read an article about it. But that was exceedingly rare, almost unheard of. Still, she clung to that faint possibility like a lifeline. Diana, ever the pragmatic attorney, insisted on a meeting with a genetic counselor to explore any medical explanations. In the meantime, Sarah had to break the news to Richard. She dreaded the conversation, fearing it might be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. That evening, Sarah found Richard waiting for her on the front porch when she got home, having sensed the results would arrive. One glance at her tear-streaked face, and he knew. She handed him the envelope, and a fresh wave of anger mixed with heartbreak contorted his features. "I can't believe this," he muttered, scanning the paper. 2 tests, the same result. "You lied to me, Sarah. All this time playing the victim when you're the one." He stopped himself, as though speaking further might break him completely. She grabbed his arm, her own tears flowing. "Richard, I swear I didn't cheat on you. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to find out. Please just give me time." He jerked away, eyes blazing. "Time for what?" "To concoct another story I tried to reconcile. I tried to believe you. But facts are facts." She sank to her knees, sobbing in the twilight glow that bathed the porch. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered desperately. For a moment, Richard hesitated, torn between compassion and betrayal. Finally, he let out a strangled sigh. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't do this anymore." He walked away, leaving Sarah crouched on the wooden boards, her heart cracking open. The only consolation, the faint flutter of the baby in her womb. Little did either of them know the biggest twist was yet to come. The rain had started just before dawn. Light at first, then heavier, soaking the city in grey melancholy. Sarah sat by the window, cradling her swollen belly, staring out at the wet streets that reflected a world just as muddled as her thoughts. A week had passed since the second paternity test had crushed her, with the same unbearable result: Richard is not the father. But how could that be? She hadn't been with anyone else. Not emotionally, not physically. The accusation alone had been an earthquake. The confirmation a landslide. Each day she had carried the weight of disbelief like a second pregnancy inside her. Her appetite had all but vanished. Her smiles were hollow, offered only to reassure Harriet and Diana that she was okay. But she wasn't. She was barely holding herself together. It was Harriet who pushed her to keep asking questions. If you're certain, then the science is wrong. And science doesn't like to be wrong. Find the flaw. That simple statement lit something inside Sarah. A flicker of stubborn fire. She wasn't ready to give up on her truth. So on a foggy Wednesday morning, she booked an appointment with Dr. Patricia Langley, a respected genetic counselor with decades of experience. Harriet insisted on going with her. You're not walking into that room alone. Not after everything you've survived. At the medical complex, Sarah clutched her file of lab reports, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sterile hum of the clinic. The waiting room was unremarkable: beige chairs, motivational posters about family health, a faint scent of antiseptic. But to Sarah, it felt like a courtroom, a place where maybe the truth would finally be heard. When they were called in, Dr. Langley greeted them with calm eyes and a firm handshake. She was in her early 50s, with graying curls tucked into a bun and a demeanor that inspired both authority and compassion. Sarah launched into her story 2 paternity tests, both negative. A marriage on the brink. A man who had cheated, but who also believed she had too. And a child growing inside her, now clouded by a question mark that no mother should have to endure. Dr. Langley listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And you're certain there's no possibility of another biological father? Sarah met her eyes. Absolutely. I swear on my life. Dr. Langley nodded slowly. Then we explore other explanations. Rare ones, but not impossible. She began explaining something Sarah had only seen in a scattered few medical articles: confined placental mosaicism. In rare cases, Dr. Langley said, turning a notepad toward them, the placenta, the tissue we use for many prenatal tests, contains a different set of DNA than the actual fetus. So a test done on maternal blood or placental DNA can misidentify paternity. It's not the norm, but it's been documented. Sarah's breath caught. You're saying the test could be wrong? Not because the lab made a mistake, but because my body gave them the wrong sample. Precisely, Dr. Langley replied. The test may have measured genetic material from the placenta instead of the baby. Harriet leaned forward. Can this be proven? With further testing, yes. But the most definitive answer would come after birth from a postnatal paternity test directly on the baby's blood. Sarah felt a jolt of hope so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Finally, something that made sense. Something she could fight with. She clutched her belly, her baby kicking softly against her hand, as if he too understood that a truth long buried was beginning to surface. The rest of the appointment blurred into instructions: what labs to visit, what tests to order, which specialists to loop in. But the final words from Dr. Langley echoed loudest. You are not crazy, and you are not alone in this. The next morning, with medical documents in hand and her heart pounding harder than ever, Sarah drafted a long message to Richard. She attached Dr. Langley's explanation, the case studies, and even a voice note where she tried through a cracked voice to explain the scientific possibilities. Then she waited. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. No reply. By the 3rd morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. A new message not from Richard but from James Peterson. "I gave him everything you sent. He's reading it now. He wants to meet the doctor." Sarah could hardly breathe. Was this the beginning of a shift? 2 days later, Dr. Langley called her, her voice calm as ever. "Sarah, Richard came in today. I explained everything again in person. He listened." Sarah's hands trembled. "And what did he say?" There was a long pause. He didn't say much, but he cried. That evening, Richard knocked on Sarah's door. She opened it with cautious restraint, wearing an oversized sweater and the same exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure he deserved to. "I'm sorry," he said. That was all. But the way his voice cracked, the way his shoulders sagged under guilt and regret, told her it wasn't just a formality. It was grief. Grief for the way he'd accused her, for not believing in her when she'd most needed it, for choosing doubt over love. "I was wrong," he continued. "So wrong. I let my own betrayal blind me to your truth. You told me again and again, and I walked away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't move, didn't speak. "I know I hurt you," he said, voice shaking. "And I know this explanation doesn't erase that. But if you'll let me, I want to be here when the baby is born. I want to take the postnatal test, and if it confirms I'm the father, I want to earn my place again, as a dad. Maybe someday, as your husband." For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than sorrow. She didn't smile, but she nodded, slowly. "I'll let you be there," she whispered. "But Richard, this doesn't mean everything is fixed. We have a long way to go." "I know," he said, "but I'll walk every step of it." And as the rain continued to fall outside, they stood in the quiet space between the past and the possible future, not healed, not whole, but willing to try. Armed with Dr. Langley's findings, Sarah called Richard, leaving a voicemail and sending him a detailed email outlining the situation. She explained the medical anomaly and pleaded for him to speak to Dr. Langley himself. Days passed with no response. Undeterred, Sarah forwarded the information to James Peterson, hoping he could persuade Richard to at least consider the possibility. Finally, 2 weeks later, Richard showed up at Dr. Langley's office unannounced. His hair was disheveled dark circles under his eyes, betraying his own sleepless nights. The genetic counselor greeted him calmly, reiterating what she had explained to Sarah, that the paternity tests could have been compromised by rare placental genetic differences. She assured him that once the baby was born, a postnatal test would almost certainly confirm he was the biological father. Richard's world spun. Guilt washed over him like a cold tide. He thought of how he had humiliated Sarah, refused to believe her, and pushed her away at her most vulnerable. He realized the terrible irony he had betrayed Sarah. Yet he'd accused her of the ultimate betrayal, compounding her pain. That evening, Richard drove to the house they once shared. Sarah stood by the living room window, arms wrapped protectively around her baby bump. As he entered, She stared at him, uncertain whether to brace herself for more heartbreak or cling to hope. "I spoke to Dr. Langley," he said quietly. She explained everything. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "So you believe me now?" He nodded, anguished. "I'm so sorry for everything. The doubts, the accusations. I don't know. Angry. Confused. And all along I was the one who actually wronged you." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You broke my trust, Richard. You and Christine. And then you left when I needed you most." He moved closer, hesitantly, taking her hand. "I know. I don't expect this to be fixed overnight. But if there's any chance of rebuilding, of starting fresh for the sake of our baby, I'm begging for it." Sarah studied the desperation in his eyes. She thought of the endless nights she'd cried alone, the heartbreak she endured while pregnant. Could she forgive him? Could they rebuild their lives on the ashes of betrayal? "I need time," she whispered. "I need you to show me you've really changed." Richard nodded, tears in his own eyes. "I will. Whatever it takes." In the months that followed, Richard underwent individual therapy to confront the root causes of his affair. They also attended couples counseling, facing their problems head-on rather than burying them under resentment. Christine Monroe requested a transfer to another branch of Allen and Myers, seeking a fresh start. Her departure cleared some of the tension at Richard's workplace, though the guilt would linger for both of them. Finally, the baby arrived, a beautiful boy. They named Daniel. The moment Richard held his son for the first time, tears of joy and regret mingled on his face. A postnatal paternity test confirmed beyond any doubt that Daniel was indeed Richard's child. It was a bittersweet vindication for Sarah. They weren't magically healed. Rebuilding trust was a gradual, painstaking process. Late-night arguments still flared old wounds, still ached, but a mutual determination to move forward for the sake of Daniel guided them. Some days they felt the old spark of love that had once brought them together. Other days they wrestled with ghosts of betrayal. Yet in their child's innocent smile, they found a reason to keep trying. And so their life carried on, not as the immaculate suburban fairy tale Sarah once envisioned, but as a more complex tapestry, woven from heartbreak, hard truths, and hope. They learned that marriage is a fragile thing, held together by honesty, compassion, and a willingness to fight for it, even when the world seems set on tearing it apart. Thank you for witnessing this roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected redemption. Sarah's ordeal reminds us that even the strongest relationships can be tested by deception, doubt, and cruel twists of fate. Richard learned the hard way that straying from trust can unravel everything you hold dear. Meanwhile, Sarah discovered that love, though resilient, requires constant nurturing and unwavering honesty. If this story moved you or kept you on the edge of your seat, please show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating real-life drama fiction. Your engagement helps us create more stories that delve into the human heart, exploring the full spectrum of love, despair, and second chances. Join our community. Add your thoughts in the comments. And together, let's explore the powerful journeys that shape us, one story at a time.